Joel set the manila envelope on the dining table. He placed it exactly in the center, right between two plates of untouched basil pasta. The food had gone cold an hour ago. My husband of 16 years pulled his hand back, and his thumb immediately went to the base of his left pinky finger. He rubbed the bare skin there. An old habit, the spot where his wedding band usually sat. Not tonight. The light from the pendant fixture overhead cut his familiar face into two distinct halves, one side illuminated, the other swallowed by the shadows of our Fairfield County kitchen. "I want a divorce," he said. I was pouring a glass of water from the filtered pitcher. I didn't stop. The water reached the brim, spilled over the glass edge, and pooled on the granite counter. I set the heavy plastic pitcher down. I reached for a cotton dish towel and dried my hands, taking my time pressing the fabric into the spaces between each finger. "I know," I said. Joel blinked. The speech he had rehearsed, the one he had likely practiced in the rearview mirror on his drive home, died in his throat. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "I have known since February," I added. The smell of the cold garlic and basil seemed to turn sour in the stagnant air of the room. Upstairs, the faint, steady thumping of bass drifted down through the ceiling. Our 16-year-old daughter, Abby, was listening to music in her bedroom, completely unaware that the foundation of her entire life was currently sitting inside a bent manila envelope on the dining table. Joel must have gripped the paper tightly on the drive over. The bottom left corner was severely creased. You know what from February," his voice cracked. The confident project manager persona was gone. Everything I said, my voice perfectly level. Tessa. The condo transfer. The cabin on Bantam Lake. Frank Petrie. The wooden legs of his dining chair shrieked against the hardwood floor as Joel shot up to his feet. All the color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in his own home. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Sit down, Joel. My name is Meredith Lawson. I am 44 years old. I work as a management accountant for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company in Stamford. My entire professional life revolves around variance analysis and fraud detection. I am paid to look at spreadsheets and find the places where the numbers lie. And tonight I had brought my work home. I reached out and opened my laptop. I had placed it on the empty chair beside me before he walked through the door, rather than on the table itself. I knew exactly what was coming tonight. Dana, my attorney, had called me at 3:47 this afternoon to tell me that Joel's lawyer had officially filed the paperwork. The screen glowed to life in the dim kitchen. 4 browser tabs were already open and waiting. "Look at the screen," I told him. He didn't move, so I turned the laptop around to face him. Tab 1 was a master timeline, a 6-month spreadsheet. Every single row detailed a specific event, the source of the evidence, and the date it was confirmed. Tab 2 was a dissipation log, $47,340 in marital funds completely drained over 23 months. Hotel charges, restaurant bills, ATM withdrawals. Every single receipt accounted for and categorized. Tab 4 contained 47 scanned pages from a black moleskin notebook. Contemporaneous notes perfectly legal in the state of Connecticut, each entry dated, timed, and signed in black ink. But the third tab was the one I really wanted him to see. Joel finally looked down. I watched his eyes track across the glowing screen. Left to right, then he stopped. He read the line again. He froze completely. He was looking at the third tab, an email chain between his mother Phyllis and an appraiser named Frank Petrie. The email where my mother-in-law clearly wrote out the instructions to illegally undervalue our marital assets. Watching him shatter in real time, I didn't feel the rush of victory I had expected. I just felt an exhausting, bone-deep fatigue. 6 months of cooking dinner for a man who was actively trying to ruin me. 6 months of smiling at the right times and asking about his day. 6 months of lying completely still beside him in the dark, counting the rhythm of his breathing until I was absolutely sure he was asleep, just so I could allow myself the luxury of crying without making a single sound. The silence was finally over. But that silence had to start somewhere. 6 months earlier, February, the wind sweeping through New Haven that Saturday afternoon was bitter and sharp. It sliced right through the collar of my canvas jacket. I was kneeling in the freezing dirt of my mother-in-law's backyard, planting a row of red and yellow tulip bulbs. Every time I visited, Phyllis managed to find a little chore for me to do. The previous week it had been organizing her garage. Today it was the flower beds. The red clay stuck under my fingernails, damp and freezing against my bare skin. I was positioned about 10 feet away from the kitchen window. It was a crank-out-style window, pushed open to a 45-degree angle to let out the heat from the oven. The cafe curtains only covered the top half of the glass. The rich, heavy scent of Joy by Dior drifted out into the cold air, completely masking the smell of the damp earth. Inside the kitchen, my husband and his mother were washing dishes. The clinking of ceramic plates and the rush of running water carried easily over the yard. And so did their voices. Phyllis never yelled. She didn't have to. When she wanted to exert control, she simply lowered her voice, forcing everyone else to lean in and listen closely. "Have you spoken to the lawyer yet?" Phyllis asked. The open window acted like a megaphone. "Next week, Mom." "I have an appointment," Joel replied. "You need to move faster," she told him. "I need you to transfer the title of the West Hartford condo into my name before April. If your wife finds out that condo exists inside the marital estate, you are going to lose it." I stopped digging. A single red tulip bulb sat in the palm of my hand. It felt hard and cold like a small stone. I stopped breathing for 4 full seconds. "Mom," Joel sounded hesitant. "And call Frank Petrie about the Bantam Lake cabin." Phyllis continued cutting him off with practiced ease. "Tell Petrie to appraise it at $89,000. That property is worth at least $300, but on paper it needs to look small." "Mom, do you really think Meredith will just let that go?" "Meredith won't do a thing," Phyllis scoffed. The sound of a coffee cup hitting a saucer echoed sharply. "Your wife is just an accountant, Joel. She doesn't know the first thing about real estate transfers or divorce law. She will sign the papers, she will take her half of this house, and she will be quiet about it. We keep the rest." My hands started to shake. I pressed the tulip bulb down into the freezing soil. "What about Tessa?" Joel asked. His voice was quieter now, but the wind carried it straight to me. "Tessa, who?" Phyllis snapped. "Mom, you know what I mean." "I do not know anything," Phyllis said, her tone absolute. "And you are not going to mention a word of it in any legal document. Your lawyer will file for a no-fault divorce. Irreconcilable differences. We keep this clean. Meredith doesn't deserve to be left with." "Meredith gets the house," Phyllis interrupted again. "She will be perfectly fine. Stop being so sentimental." 3 pieces of information dropped into my reality within 90 seconds. My husband was planning to divorce me. My mother-in-law was actively orchestrating a conspiracy to hide hundreds of thousands of dollars in assets. And my husband was sleeping with a woman named Tessa. The accountant inside my brain immediately began sorting the data, categorizing the variables, assessing the severity of the threat. The human being inside my chest just wanted to scream. 2 monsters. I was married into a family of monsters, but I didn't stand up. I didn't march through the back door and confront them. I stayed on my knees in the dirt. I picked up the next bulb, pressed it into the earth, and covered it with soil. I packed the dirt down tight. I watered the row. I walked over to the outdoor spigot and scrubbed my freezing hands under the icy water until my skin turned bright red. When I finally walked into the kitchen, the room was warm. Phyllis was wiping down the granite counter with a microfiber cloth. Joel was pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. "All done, Mom," I said. "The red and yellow tulips are in." Phyllis offered me a tight, perfectly polite smile. "Excellent work, Meredith. You were always so good at these little household tasks." I smiled back. It was the exact same mild, accommodating smile I had been practicing for 16 years. On the drive back to Fairfield County, the sky hung low and gray over the bare winter trees. Joel drove, keeping his eyes on the road. The heater blasted warm air through the vents, but my hands still felt like ice. I kept my face turned toward the passenger window. Joel turned on the radio, letting a classic rock station fill the heavy silence inside the car. Staring out at the passing highway, my mind drifted to my mother. Corinne. For 20 years, my mother had endured my father's infidelity. She knew about the other women. She knew, and she stayed, constantly repeating the mantra that children needed their father. I remembered being 11 years old, sitting by the window in my second-floor bedroom, looking down at our driveway. Every single night when my mother came home from work, she would park her blue Ford Taurus, turn off the engine, and sit in the dark. The interior dome light would stay off. Her hands would grip the steering wheel. I used to count the minutes. 14 minutes. Every night she sat in the dark for 14 minutes, gathering the strength to walk through the front door and pretend her life wasn't breaking her in half. She died when I was 28. Stomach cancer. The doctors blamed a variety of environmental factors, but I always believed it was the silence that killed her. 20 years of swallowing betrayal and pretending it tasted fine had turned her own body into a battlefield. I promised myself a long time ago that I would never sit in a parked car like she did. I would drive. But as the trees blurred past my window, I realized I had no idea where I was going. Not yet. That night, the house was entirely quiet. Joel was fast asleep beside me. The faint, minty smell of his toothpaste hovered in the space between us on the mattress. The street lamp outside our window cast a long, pale shadow across the bedroom ceiling. Through the wall, I heard Abby shift in her sleep, the springs of her mattress creaking softly. I lay flat on my back, my eyes wide open, staring up at the dark ceiling. I shifted my weight and my left hand brushed against Joel's arm. My wedding ring tapped lightly against his skin. I pulled my hand back and pressed it flat against my own ribs. I was doing exactly what my mother had done. I was lying in the dark, sharing a bed with a man who was actively destroying my life, and I was saying nothing. But I made a decision right then, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. My silence was not going to be a surrender. If I was going to stay quiet, it would be a strategy. I would build a fortress around myself and my daughter before he even realized a war had started. I would let him believe he was winning. I would let Phyllis believe I was nothing more than a naive, quiet accountant who would take whatever crumbs they decided to leave behind. I just needed to figure out exactly how to build that fortress. Joel shifted in his sleep, turning toward me. His arm reached out lazily in the dark. "You awake," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Almost, I whispered back. "Go to sleep. Love you." I stared at the shadows on the ceiling. I didn't answer him, and he was already too far gone in his own comfortable dreams to notice. It had been a full week since that freezing Saturday afternoon in my mother-in-law's backyard. I sat alone in my home office. The house was completely quiet. Opening my personal laptop, the old Dell machine I only kept around for filing our annual tax returns, I waited. The cooling fan whirred to life, a low and steady hum in the dark room. Since I handled all the household bills, I had the login credentials for our joint credit card account with Chase. I navigated to the portal and pulled up the PDF statements. I was an accountant. I was not looking for a woman named Tessa. I was looking for patterns. I was looking for the variances that did not belong. Pulling up 24 months of transaction history, I hit the Control and F keys on the keyboard. I typed the words "residence in." 23 separate results populated on the screen. Every single charge landed on a Thursday. The room rates hovered between $189 and $229 a night. Every stay was at a location up in Hartford. Whenever Joel was gone on a Thursday night, he claimed he was staying late to oversee a commercial build down in Bridgeport. Bridgeport was a 45-minute drive south. Hartford was an hour north. Clearing the search bar, I typed Tiffany. One single result appeared: $1,240 spent on December 14th. I received a plain wool sweater for Christmas that year. I cleared the bar again, this time typing the word bouquet. 2 separate charges appeared for a boutique florist located on Pearl Street in Hartford. My dining room vases had been completely empty for the last 3 years. Opening a blank Excel spreadsheet, I stared at the grid. I did not cry. My profession trained me to take raw and chaotic data and organize it into clean columns, and that was exactly what I did. 3 days later, the spreadsheet had grown into a massive document containing 43 rows of data. The desk lamp cast a harsh circle of yellow light over my keyboard, while the rest of the room was swallowed by the dark. A mug of Earl Grey tea sat near my elbow. It was completely cold, and a thin, cloudy film rested on the surface. The bergamot smelled sour. My shoulders were tight, pulling painfully at the base of my neck. Every click of the computer mouse felt heavy. The blue light from the monitor washed over my face. Joel used to tell me I looked like a ghost when I worked late into the night. Sitting there in the dark, I finally understood the irony of his words. I highlighted the final column and let the software calculate the sum. $47,340. He had drained that amount over the course of 23 months. I broke the numbers down further. $19,000 spent on hotel rooms, $8,000 on dinners at upscale restaurants I had never stepped foot in, $6,000 at jewelers and local department stores, $11,000 in cash advances pulled from automated teller machines up in Hartford. This was marital money. Money from the exact same account where my direct deposits landed every 2 weeks. Money I earned by staying late at the Stamford office to make sure our quarter-end targets were met. Pushing my chair back, I let it roll quietly over the carpet, then walked down the short hallway toward our master bedroom. Joel was inside the attached bathroom. The shower was running, and a thick line of white steam drifted out from the gap under the door. The ventilation fan rattled above. I walked straight to his closet. I did not rummage wildly through his belongings. I simply looked for the anomaly. Pulling open the third drawer down beneath a neatly folded stack of his navy and gray polo shirts, my fingers brushed against cold metal and smooth glass. I pulled the fabric back. It was an old cellular phone. An iPhone SE. It was definitely not the newer model he carried in his pocket every day. I didn't press the power button, knowing the device would require a passcode. I simply stared at it, registering its exact location. Third drawer, left side, under the shirts. The sound of the running water abruptly stopped. Meredith Joel called out from behind the bathroom door. I have to head down to Bridgeport early tomorrow morning. I might be home a little late. I slid the polo shirts back into place, smoothing the fabric perfectly. Okay, I said, keeping my voice entirely level. I left some chicken and rice in the fridge for you. You are the best, he called back. Closing the closet door softly, I stood in the quiet bedroom listening to the metallic scrape of the shower curtain being pulled back. $47,000 was just a number. A second phone hidden under a stack of shirts was infrastructure. People made mistakes and people slipped up once or twice. You do not buy a second phone for a mistake. You buy it to build a system. Joel had not just fallen into an affair, he had constructed an entire parallel life complete with its own budget and communication network, and he genuinely believed he was a genius for maintaining it. And Phyllis knew all about it. She was actively helping him dismantle our marriage, so he could walk away with the bulk of our assets, leaving me with the house and a pat on the back. They wanted this to be a clean break. I walked back to my office. Opening a new browser tab, I typed my query into the search bar. Divorce attorney, Fairfield County, Connecticut, equitable distribution. The top result was a legal firm based in Hartford, Prescott, and Hale. Their website stated they specialized in high-asset divorce and financial discovery. I wrote their phone number down in a small notebook. Underneath the digits, I wrote 2 words: tomorrow, lunch break. The next day at noon, I sat inside my car in the pharmaceutical company parking lot. The windows were rolled up tight against the freezing February chill. The heater blasted warm air across my shins. A turkey sandwich sat wrapped in foil on the passenger seat, completely ignored. I dialed the number. My heart hammered against my ribs, beating out a frantic and uneven rhythm. Prescott and Hale, a woman answered. How may I direct your call? I would like to schedule a consultation with Miss Prescott, I said. It is regarding a divorce matter. Of course, the receptionist replied, her tone practiced and smooth. Can I ask if this is a contested or uncontested matter? Staring out through the windshield, I watched a coworker walk toward the office building. He was holding a coffee cup, living a completely normal Tuesday. I waited 3 seconds before answering. He doesn't know yet, I said. He doesn't know that I know. Dana Prescott called me back exactly 20 minutes later. Her voice was sharp, direct, and completely devoid of any patronizing sympathy. I liked her immediately. Mrs. Lawson, Dana said. I understand you want to maintain the element of surprise. Is that correct? I want to know exactly what my rights are before I make a single move, I told her. Smart, she replied. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state. That means the court divides assets fairly, which does not always mean a simple 50-50 split. Fault is a factor here. Adultery can directly impact the alimony determination. Do you have any actual proof of an affair? I have 2 years of joint bank statements showing over $47,000 in unexplained hotel and jewelry charges, I said. And I found a secondary phone hidden in his closet. There was a brief pause on the line. You mentioned you are a management accountant? Yes. Good. I am going to need you to do a few things, Dana said, the pace of her words picking up. But first listen to me very carefully. Connecticut is an all-party consent state. You cannot record any conversations without the explicit agreement of everyone involved. If you violate that, it is a criminal charge. I overheard a conversation last weekend, I said, thinking of the open kitchen window, the freezing dirt, the smell of Dior perfume. I didn't record it, but I remember every single word. Contemporaneous notes, Dana instructed. You need to write it down immediately. Date, time, location, and the exact content of what you heard. Sign the bottom of the page. Use a black ballpoint pen. Never erase anything. If you make a mistake, cross it out with a single line. The courts here accept contemporaneous notes as corroborating evidence. I let out a long breath. The heater fan whirred softly in the background. For the first time in a week, the suffocating heavy rage in my chest began to recede, replaced by something cold and solid. Direction. I had a clear path forward. I can see you next Wednesday, Dana said. Bring everything you have. I agreed to the time and ended the call. The silence in the car felt entirely different now. It was no longer a trap, but a waiting room. Reaching across the center console, I picked up the foil-wrapped sandwich and peeled the silver paper back. It was the first time in 7 days that I actually felt hungry enough to eat a full meal. The following Wednesday afternoon, I drove up Interstate 91 toward Hartford. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the highway traffic moved at a steady, monotonous crawl. I kept both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. 10 and 2. My mother had taught me to drive that way, and the physical habit had stuck with me for decades. I was heading toward a destination she had never found the courage to seek out for herself. The law firm of Prescott and Hale occupied the 4th floor of an imposing brick building on Pearl Street. The lobby was quiet, smelling faintly of lemon polish and expensive leather furniture. A young receptionist offered me a glass of sparkling water. I declined, choosing instead to sit straight-backed in a wing chair until a door opened down the hall. Dana Prescott walked into the waiting area exactly on time. She wore a sharp gray blazer and wire-rimmed glasses that framed dark, observant eyes. Her dark hair was cut into a short, severe bob. She did not offer me a warm, comforting smile or any practiced words of sympathy. She offered a firm, professional handshake, and I respected her immediately for it. Sitting across from her wide mahogany desk a few minutes later, I slid 3 thick manila folders across the polished wood. One contained the printed credit card statements with the hotel and jewelry charges highlighted in bright yellow. The second held the summary spreadsheet I had built late at night in my home office. The third was a single sheet of printer paper detailing the exact conversation I had overheard through the open kitchen window. Dana opened the folders. She did not speak for 12 straight minutes. The only sound in the office was the low hum of the central heating vent and the crisp turn of paper. I watched the Hartford skyline through the massive glass window behind her desk. The towering insurance buildings and the old church steeples cut sharp gray shapes into the afternoon horizon. I kept my breathing slow and measured, waiting for the professional verdict on the ruins of my marriage. Dana finally closed the last folder. She took off her glasses and set them carefully beside her computer keyboard. "You have 2 very distinct weapons here," the attorney said. Her voice was steady and clinical. "The first is the dissipation of marital assets. Your husband has spent over $47,000 of joint funds on an ongoing affair. The court will credit your side of the ledger for that exact amount. The second is fraudulent conveyance. If your mother-in-law actually executes that condominium transfer, the court has the power to void the transaction entirely, or they will count the full value of the property against his share of the settlement." I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap. "What else do I need?" "A forensic accountant," Dana replied, without a second of hesitation. "A very good one. And you need time. You have to let them move the assets first. We are going to document every single thing they do. Every time they try to hide $1, they give us another piece of evidence. Every piece of evidence is leverage we will use against them." "How long will that take?" I asked. 3 to 6 months, Dana said. She leaned back in her heavy leather chair, studying my face. Can you endure that? I looked away from her, staring at a framed legal degree hanging on the adjacent wall. I thought of the blue Ford Taurus parked in the driveway. My mother endured 20 years of it. Dana leaned forward, resting her elbows heavily on the mahogany desk. "You are not your mother." "I know," I said. "That is exactly why I am sitting in this chair." I opened my leather purse and pulled out my checkbook. The retainer fee for the firm was $5,000. I wrote the numbers out in clear, dark block letters. The funds came from a private savings account Joel did not even know existed. It was a small inheritance from my grandmother that I had deliberately never commingled with our joint household finances. I tore the check from the paper binding and slid it across the desk. I was officially stepping over the line. That same evening, I stopped at the Barnes & Noble bookstore in downtown Stamford. The air inside smelled deeply of roasted coffee beans and fresh printed pages. I walked straight past the fiction aisles and headed directly to the stationery section. I did not want a cheap spiral notebook with thin, tearing pages. I spent 10 minutes examining the shelves before choosing a black moleskin journal. It had a stiff, durable hardcover and thick, cream-colored paper. Next, I picked out a fresh pack of Pilot black ink pens. The gel ink dried almost instantly upon hitting the page and would never smear. When I pulled into my driveway an hour later, the house was completely dark except for a single light on the second floor. Joel was not home. He had called me earlier in the afternoon to complain about a late project management meeting. I knew exactly which hotel room in Hartford that fake meeting was taking place in. Walking inside, the faint rhythmic thump of a bass line drifting down the stairs told me Abby was doing her homework with her headphones turned up loud. I set my purse down and walked into the kitchen. The granite island was cold against my forearms as I sat on a bar stool. I peeled the plastic wrapping off the black notebook and opened the heavy cover to the very first page. I pressed the tip of the pen against the pristine cream paper. My hand was perfectly steady. Date: February 17th. Time: approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. Location: the backyard garden of Phyllis Lawson, standing roughly 3 feet from the open kitchen window. I wrote out the contents of the conversation exactly as I remembered them. The letters flowed from my pen in sharp, precise cursive. Phyllis instructed Joel to transfer the West Hartford condo into her name before April. She instructed him to contact Frank Petrie to appraise the Bantam Lake cabin at $89,000. She stated he should file for a no-fault divorce. Joel mentioned a woman named Tessa. Phyllis indicated she already knew. I signed my full legal name at the bottom of the page. Closing the thick cover, I carried the notebook down the short hallway into my home office. I crouched down and opened the bottom drawer of the heavy metal filing cabinet tucked in the corner. This was the drawer where I kept 7 years of joint tax returns, mortgage statements, and boring financial documents. Joel had never once opened this drawer in his entire life. He hated dealing with paperwork. I pushed the black notebook all the way to the very back of the drawer, wedging it securely behind the tax folders from 2018. I slid the metal drawer shut and turned the small brass key. The lock clicked heavily into place. My first real weapon was armed and secured. 2 weeks later, the air outside had begun to thaw into late March. We drove up the coastline to New Haven for Sunday dinner. It was a long-standing family tradition. Every other Sunday, without fail, we gathered at the townhouse. The dining room smelled overwhelmingly of roasted chicken and fresh rosemary sprigs. Phyllis emerged from the kitchen, carrying a heavy ceramic bowl of mashed potatoes, setting it perfectly in the center of the dining table. The green beans steaming in the adjacent serving dish had been harvested directly from the garden I had been working in when I heard her voice floating through the window. We took our usual places around the heavy oak table. Phyllis commanded the head of the table, sitting tall and rigid just as she always did. She had set out her formal white porcelain plates with the delicate blue trim around the edges. The silver salt and pepper shakers gleamed under the warm, flickering light of 2 tall taper candles. Everything in the room was tightly controlled. Everything was placed in its exact proper position to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. I watched the 3 people sitting around me. It felt as though a thick layer of fog had been completely wiped away from my vision. I was looking at my family through an entirely new lens. Joel, Phyllis said. She sliced neatly into her portion of the roasted chicken. About the cabin, up on Bantam Lake. I was thinking we should probably have the exterior painted this summer. She paused, lifting a small, polite bite to her mouth. That old place is barely worth anything these days, but we should at least keep it looking tidy for the neighbors. Barely worth anything. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, letting the freezing liquid wash down my dry throat. The strategy was unfolding right in front of me. She was actively planting the narrative. She was setting the stage so that when the divorce papers finally arrived, everyone at the table would already view the lakefront property as a rundown, worthless shack instead of a premium asset. I glanced casually across the table. Joel was staring intently at his plate, actively avoiding any eye contact with me. He mashed his potatoes with the back of his fork, his left thumb rhythmically rubbing against the base of his pinky finger. "I love the cabin," Abby chimed in. My 16-year-old daughter smiled brightly at her father, completely oblivious to the dark undercurrents swirling around the dining room. "Are we going to go up there this summer, Dad?" Joel looked up and forced a wide, warm smile. It looked entirely authentic if you did not know the horrific truth hiding behind his teeth. "Of course we are, sweetheart," he promised her. I looked at my daughter. She was so bright, so incredibly observant, yet perfectly insulated from the rot decaying beneath the floorboards of her life. She was eating her dinner, trusting the adults in the room to protect her. I was going to keep her ignorant of the truth for as long as I possibly could. Then I shifted my gaze back to my mother-in-law. The older woman was cutting another piece of rosemary chicken with the surgical precision of someone who had dominated this family for 4 decades. Just last week, an appraiser named Frank Petrie had likely written the fabricated number of 89,000 on a piece of official letterhead. Phyllis knew it. Joel knew it. They were putting on a play for my benefit. The entire dining table was nothing more than a theater stage. I picked up my silver fork and speared a green bean. I chewed the food slowly, forcing myself to taste the butter and the coarse sea salt. When Phyllis launched into a long, dramatic complaint about the landscaping choices of her next-door neighbors, I laughed at the exact right moment. When Abby emptied her glass, I reached across the table and poured her more water. I delivered a completely flawless performance. I did not crack under the pressure. I did not stand up and scream the truth into their lying faces. I matched their calculated deception with my own polite, pleasant silence. That night after we returned to Fairfield and the house went dark, I waited for Joel to fall asleep. Once his breathing deepened into a heavy rhythm, I slipped quietly out of bed. The hardwood floorboards were cold against my bare feet. I walked down the dark hallway to my office, unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and pulled out the black moleskin notebook. I turned past the first few entries to a completely fresh page. Entry number 7. I documented the date, the time, the roast chicken dinner, and the exact specific words Phyllis had used to devalue the Bantam Lake cabin in front of witnesses. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, blew gently on the wet ink to dry it, and locked the truth away in the dark. The transition from March to April in Connecticut always felt reluctant. The air stayed sharp against the skin, and the sky held onto a stubborn flat gray that made the afternoons feel endlessly long. I drove down Interstate 95 toward Norwalk on a Tuesday afternoon, taking a late lunch break from the Stamford office. Dana had given me a name and a phone number the previous week. I needed a specialist, someone who could dig through the dirt without getting their hands tied by polite marital boundaries. The coffee shop was tucked into a quiet, unassuming strip mall off the main road. Pushing the heavy glass door open, a small brass bell chimed above my head. The space smelled strongly of roasted espresso beans, damp wool coats, and burnt sugar. I spotted her immediately in the back corner booth, sitting exactly where she said she would be. Gail Novak did not look like an accountant. She had shoulder-length auburn hair that fell loosely around her face, a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses hanging from a silver chain around her neck, and a posture that suggested she did not waste her time on pleasantries. Dana had referred her, calling her the most relentless forensic financial examiner in the county. I slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from her. She was already drinking black coffee from a thick, chipped ceramic mug. She did not offer a handshake. She simply held out her hand, palm up, waiting for the documents. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the thick manila folder containing the printed spreadsheet I had built in my home office. I placed it squarely in the center of the table. Gail picked up the stack of paper. She slipped her reading glasses up onto the bridge of her nose and began to read. I sat in complete silence while she turned the first page, then the second, and then the third. The espresso machine hissed loudly behind the front counter, releasing a thick cloud of white steam into the air. "You did 80% of my job for me," Gail said. She did not look up from the columns of numbers. Her finger traced a line down the page, stopping at the categorized hotel charges. "Most clients come to me crying with a shoebox full of crumpled ATM receipts. You built a fully cross-referenced variance analysis." "I am a management accountant," I told her. My voice sounded flat even to my own ears. "I am trained to find the anomalies in the quarterly budgets. Finding them in my own checking account was not particularly difficult." Gail finally lowered the paperwork and looked at me over the rims of her glasses. "I can see that. You have mapped out the spending patterns perfectly, but I have something you do not have. I have subpoena power. I need direct access to 2 very specific things before we can build an airtight case for your attorney." She tapped her index finger against the wooden table. "First, I need to pull the official title records for that condominium transfer you noted in your timeline. Second, I need to find the official appraisal report for the cabin up on Bantam Lake. Your mother-in-law is smart, but nobody moves real estate without leaving a paper trail in the county clerk system." "Find it," I said. I opened my purse and pulled out my checkbook. Gail required a $12,000 retainer to begin her forensic audit. It was a massive sum of money, but I had the funds sitting untouched in a separate account. I had received my Q1 performance bonus just 2 weeks prior. Joel had never asked about my annual bonuses. He never asked about our retirement contributions, our property tax rates, or the balance of our savings accounts. For 16 years, he had happily handed over his paychecks and let me manage the household finances because he considered the administrative work completely boring. He loved the fun parts of being a husband, like buying a new television or planning a vacation, but he despised the invisible labor that kept a family afloat. Sitting in that coffee shop writing out a check for $12,000, the irony tasted bitter in the back of my throat. His absolute laziness regarding our financial reality had become my greatest weapon. He had no idea how much money I actually made, which meant he had no idea I could afford to hire a woman like Gail Novak to dismantle his entire secret life. I handed the check across the table. Gail folded it neatly in half and slipped it into her jacket pocket. "I will be in touch," she said, picking up her coffee mug. 3 long weeks passed. The spreadsheet on my personal computer grew by 3 more rows. The black moleskin notebook hidden in my filing cabinet gained 4 new entries. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner. I asked Joel how his commercial build down in Bridgeport was progressing, and I listened with a pleasant smile while he lied directly to my face about pouring concrete and dealing with difficult city inspectors. Then, my cellular phone vibrated against the wood of my home office desk. It was late in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I picked it up and saw Gail's number flashing on the screen. "I have the property records," Gail said, the moment I answered the call. Her voice was entirely clinical, entirely detached from the emotional wreckage of the situation. "The condominium in West Hartford has officially been transferred. The new deed lists Phyllis Lawson as the sole owner." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "When did they sign the paperwork?" "The deed was executed and notarized on March 8th, Gail replied. March 8th. That was exactly 3 weeks after I knelt in the freezing dirt of my mother-in-law's backyard and listened to her give Joel the direct order to hide the property. Phyllis had said she would do it, and Phyllis had done it. She operated with a ruthless, terrifying efficiency. The condo was originally purchased in 2019. Gail continued the sound of keyboard keys clacking rapidly in the background of the call. The original title was listed solely in Joel's name. However, under Connecticut law, because the property was purchased during the marriage using joint income, it is legally considered a marital asset. Transferring it to his mother on the eve of a divorce filing is a textbook fraudulent conveyance. The family court judge has the authority to void the transfer entirely, or they will credit the full market value directly to your side of the settlement. I closed my eyes, picturing the quiet, confident smirk Phyllis always wore when she sat at the head of her dining table. She genuinely believed she had outsmarted me. "How much is the property actually worth?" I asked. "I pulled the current market comparables for that specific neighborhood in West Hartford," Gail said. "It is sitting right around $285,000. I thanked her and ended the call. The silence in the home office felt incredibly heavy. $285,000. That was the amount of money my husband and his mother had casually decided to steal from my future. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, pulled out the black notebook, and uncapped my pen. I turned to a fresh page and wrote out entry number 14. I documented the date of the phone call, the name of the forensic accountant, the date of the deed transfer, and the estimated market value of the stolen property. I drew a single dark line beneath the final paragraph and signed my name. The real test of my endurance arrived on the final Thursday of April. Joel walked through the front door at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. I was standing in the kitchen washing a coffee cup in the sink, and the sudden sound of his heavy work boots hitting the entryway floor made me drop the sponge. This was a massive anomaly in the schedule. For 23 consecutive months, Thursday nights belonged to the Residence Inn up in Hartford. Thursday nights belonged to Tessa. Whenever Thursday rolled around, Joel always called me at 4 in the afternoon to apologize, claiming the construction crew in Bridgeport had run into an emergency and he had to stay late to supervise the site. Yet here he was standing in our kitchen 2 hours before the sun even went down. He had showered, his wet hair was combed neatly back from his forehead, and the heavy metallic scent of his expensive cologne completely overwhelmed the smell of the lemon dish soap in the sink. He was wearing a dark navy blue button-down shirt. It was the exact same shirt he had worn on our very first anniversary dinner, miraculously preserved in the back of his closet and freshly ironed for the occasion. "Put your coat on," Joel said. He flashed a wide, charming smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I made a surprise reservation. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel, keeping my movements deliberately slow. "A reservation? What is the occasion?" "No occasion," he said, stepping forward and resting his hands lightly on my shoulders. His palms felt overly warm through the thin fabric of my blouse. "I just wanted to take my beautiful wife out for a nice dinner. We are going to Adriana's." Adriana's was a high-end Italian restaurant nestled in the center of Fairfield. We went there to celebrate our first year of marriage, and we had not been back since. Walking into the restaurant an hour later felt like stepping onto a movie set. The walls were exposed red brick. The lighting was kept incredibly dim, and thick white wax candles flickered in the center of every table. The air was thick with the rich, heavy aromas of roasted garlic reducing red wine and warm olive oil. Soft opera music played from hidden speakers in the ceiling, weaving through the low hum of polite conversation. The hostess led us to a quiet, secluded booth in the back corner. Joel pulled my chair out for me, playing the role of the perfect, attentive gentleman. As we settled into the booth, I watched him carefully. He picked up the wine list, his eyes scanning the expensive bottles, but his left thumb was rubbing the side of the leather binding in a frantic little circle. It was a nervous tick. He only did that when he was dealing with an angry client at work, or when he was trying to sell a lie. I knew exactly what this dinner was. It was a guilt offering. I had checked the Chase Bank portal 2 days prior. I knew for an absolute fact that he had been with Tessa the previous Thursday, because the charge for the Residence Inn was sitting right there in black and white. He had spent the night in another woman's bed, and the subsequent guilt had festered inside him all week. This expensive dinner, this navy blue shirt, the flickering candlelight, it was all an elaborate performance to make himself feel like a good man. He was overcompensating. He needed to prove to himself that he still loved his family even while he was actively dismantling it. The waiter poured our glasses of red wine. The dark liquid caught the light of the candle, shimmering violently, as Joel set his glass down on the white tablecloth. His hand was shaking, just a fraction of an inch, but I saw it. "Meredith," Joel said, leaning across the table. His voice dropped into a low, intimate register. "I know I have been incredibly busy lately. The project down in Bridgeport is taking up so much of my time, and I know I have not been present at home." "It is fine, Joel," I said, offering him that same practiced mild smile. "I know you are working hard for us." "I am," he agreed quickly, latching onto my excuse with desperate relief. "But I want you to know that I appreciate it. I appreciate everything you do. Our family means everything to me." I looked into his eyes. He actually believed the words coming out of his mouth. He possessed a terrifying ability to compartmentalize his reality. He did not view himself as a villain. He viewed himself as a hard-working provider who simply deserved a little extra excitement on the side. He thought he could live in two completely different worlds without the walls ever collapsing. And lying right across the table from him, I realized we were both doing the exact same thing. We were sitting in a romantic Italian restaurant surrounded by flickering candles and soft music, and we were both lying through our teeth. The only difference was the motivation. Joel was lying out of sheer cowardice, desperate to avoid the messy consequences of his own actions. I was lying out of sheer strategy, carefully stacking the bricks of my fortress higher and higher while he drank his wine. "Cheers," I said, lifting my glass toward him. "Cheers to us," Joel replied, smiling back. The fragile crystal glasses clinked together in the quiet booth. The sound was sharp and clear, cutting through the romantic opera music playing above us. I brought the rim of the glass to my lips and took a sip. The expensive red wine tasted incredibly bitter, burning the back of my throat as I swallowed it down. When we finally returned home that night, Joel fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by the sheer effort of performing the role of the devoted husband. I lay beside him in the dark, waiting for the heavy, rhythmic sound of his breathing to fill the bedroom. Once I was sure he was deeply asleep, I slipped out from under the heavy duvet. I walked silently down the hallway, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. I unlocked the filing cabinet, opened the black notebook, and wrote out entry number 19. I documented the date, the location, the unexpected Thursday arrival, and the exact words he used to express his profound appreciation for our family. I closed the book, locked the drawer, and stared at the dark wall of my office. My fortress was getting stronger every single day, but I knew Gail was still digging through the county records, searching for the appraisal on the Bantam Lake cabin. The hotel receipts and the guilt dinners were just the foundation. The real earthquake was still coming. The transition from May into early June brought warmer, heavy air that settled over Fairfield County like a damp blanket. I was standing in the center of our master bedroom, pulling clean clothes from a woven laundry basket. My hands moved mechanically, smoothing out the wrinkles on a navy blue polo shirt. It was the exact shirt Joel wore every single Thursday. I folded the sleeves back, aligning the seams with practiced precision, when my cellular phone suddenly vibrated against the wooden nightstand. The glowing screen illuminated the dark corner of the room. The time read 8:47 in the evening. The caller identification displayed the name Gail Novak. I set the folded shirt down on the mattress. Picking up the device, I stepped quickly out into the hallway and pulled the bedroom door firmly shut behind me. The hardwood floor felt cool against my bare feet, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the day. A thin sliver of yellow light spilled out from beneath Abby's bedroom door down the hall, accompanied by the faint, muffled rhythm of her music playing through a set of headphones. I pressed my back against the cool plaster of the wall and answered the call. "Meredith," the forensic accountant said. Her voice lacked its usual clinical detachment. It sounded sharp, carrying an urgent energy that immediately made my stomach tighten. I found the emails. "What emails?" I asked, keeping my own voice barely above a whisper. "Frank Petrie," Gail replied. "The real estate appraiser your mother-in-law hired." She emailed him 3 separate times regarding the Bantam Lake cabin, and he was foolish enough to reply using his professional business account. I have the entire chain right in front of me. I held my breath, waiting for the numbers. Her first message was brief. Gail continued reading directly from her screen. She wrote to him saying Joel needed the cabin appraised for a family matter and told him to keep the number under 90,000. Petrie responded the next morning. He pushed back. He told her the property had been recently renovated. It was sitting on prime lakefront footage, and the comparable sales in that specific zip code were pulling between $290,000 and $340,000. He explicitly stated he could not write a report putting the value under $200,000. And Phyllis, I asked, already knowing my mother-in-law would never accept the word no. Phyllis reminded him of his obligations, Gail said, her tone laced with professional disgust. Her exact words were that she had helped him close 3 separate commercial properties last year and that he owed her a favor. She demanded the $89,000 valuation and promised to send a bottle of expensive scotch to his office. Petrie folded immediately. He agreed to the $89,000 but noted he would have to bury protective language and extraordinary assumptions deep in the fine print of the report to cover his own license. I stared at the closed door of my bedroom. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. The actual market value of the cabin was roughly $320,000. The fabricated appraisal was reporting $89,000. That was a difference of $231,000. When I added that amount to the $285,000 condominium she had already transferred into her own name, the total sum of hidden assets soared over $500,000. Phyllis and Joel were not just trying to ensure a favorable divorce settlement. They were actively conspiring to steal over $500,000 from the marital estate. From me, from the life I had helped build. This changes everything, Gail explained, her voice pulling me back from the math. This is no longer just a simple matter of the dissipation of marital funds. If your husband submits this fabricated appraisal to the family court inside a sworn financial affidavit, it elevates to fraud upon the court. Deliberately misrepresenting the value of an asset under oath is perjury. Your mother-in-law directing the appraiser is a clear conspiracy. It is a completely different level of warfare. Can you send the email chain to me? I asked. I have already forwarded the encrypted file to your secure address, Gail confirmed. I ended the call and walked silently down the hall to my home office. Opening my laptop, I decrypted the message and stared at the 3-page document. Reading the words directly from the screen made the betrayal feel incredibly tangible. Phyllis wrote with that same polite absolute authority she used at the Sunday dinner table. She did not yell, and she did not threaten. She simply reminded people of their debts to her, and she expected them to comply. But spoken words vanished into the air. An email was digital ink. It carried timestamps, server routing data, and registered email addresses. It was undeniable proof. I saved the document to a secure external flash drive. Unlocking the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, I tucked the drive safely behind my old tax returns. Then I pulled out the black moleskin notebook and uncapped my pen. I wrote out entry number 28, documenting the exact time of Gail's call and the specific dollar amounts of the appraisal fraud. Returning to the master bedroom, I found Joel lying against the pillows, casually scrolling through the screen of his expensive phone. He glanced up as I walked in. "Who was that on the phone?" he asked idly. "Just an old college friend," I lied, slipping under the heavy duvet. "She was calling to check in." Joel grunted, his attention already returning to his screen. I closed my eyes. For the very first time in 3 agonizing months, the heavy knot of anxiety sitting in my chest completely dissolved. I felt a genuine sweeping sense of victory. They had built a trap for me, but they had left their fingerprints all over the steel teeth. The following week, I sat in the Hartford office of Prescott and Hale. Dana reviewed the growing stack of evidence spread across her wide mahogany desk. The dissipation log for the affair, the property deed for the condominium transfer, the devastating email chain proving the appraisal fraud. "Meredith," the attorney said, tapping a manicured finger against the thick folders. "This is one of the most thoroughly prepared cases I have ever seen from a client in my entire career. Normally, I have to spend months fighting defensive subpoenas to get a fraction of this documentation. I have had 6 months to prepare," I reminded her. Dana took off her wire-rimmed glasses and looked directly into my eyes. She did not look at the paperwork or the numbers or the evidence. She looked at me. "I know. And I also know exactly what those 6 months have cost you. You are incredibly competent, and you are building an ironclad case. But that does not mean you are fine." I swallowed hard, refusing to let the emotion rise into my throat. "What is the next step?" Dana outlined the strategy with military precision. We were going to wait for Joel's attorney, a man named Bradley Husk, to file the initial no-fault divorce petition. The moment that happened, Dana would immediately counterfile with a fault-based petition citing the adultery. We would attach the dissipation claim and file a formal motion to void the fraudulent condominium conveyance. But the emails regarding the cabin would be held back. They were our nuclear option. We do not show them the emails until the preliminary hearing, Dana explained. We let Joel submit the fabricated appraisal in his sworn financial affidavit. We let him commit perjury on the record. Then, right in the middle of the negotiation room, we present the email chain. The moment Bradley Husk realizes his client is committing fraud, he will be ethically obligated to withdraw from the case. We will strip your husband of his legal counsel and his leverage in a single move. When will Joel file? I asked. He is preparing the paperwork now, Dana said. It could be this week, or it could be next month. You cannot control their timeline. You can only control your own preparation. Driving home that afternoon, I merged onto the highway and crossed the massive steel span of the Gold Star Memorial Bridge. The waters of the Thames River flowed gray and steady far below the concrete pillars. The late afternoon sun warmed the interior of my car. I felt incredibly strong. I had a brilliant attorney, a relentless accountant, and $500,000 worth of undeniable evidence. The fortress I had been building in the dark was finally complete. But I had underestimated the instincts of the woman who built her own empire from the ground up. The illusion of total security shattered just 3 days later. It was early June, and we were seated around the dining table at the townhouse in New Haven for our customary Sunday dinner. Phyllis had prepared a heavy pot roast. The rich aroma of braised beef, roasted carrots, and dark gravy filled the elegant room. The silver forks clinked softly against the porcelain plates. Everything appeared entirely normal, but the atmosphere felt incredibly thin, as though all the oxygen had been slowly siphoned out of the room. Phyllis was watching me. Her gaze was sharper than usual, her eyes tracking my hands as I passed the serving bowl of green beans to Abby. "Meredith," my mother-in-law said. Her tone was casual. It was far too casual. "Do you happen to remember any of your old college friends who ended up living in Hartford? I was driving through the city on Thursday afternoon and I noticed how lovely the architecture is around the Pearl Street area." My heart slammed violently against the inside of my ribcage. "Pearl Street," she said. "Pearl Street. That was the exact location of the Prescott and Hale law firm. Someone had seen me, perhaps a former real estate colleague of hers or a business associate of Joel's. Someone had recognized my face entering that building, and they had made a phone call." Phyllis did not know for certain why I was there, but her predatory instincts had been triggered. She was throwing out the bait right in the middle of dinner, watching closely to see if I would flinch. The 16 years of emotional suppression I had practiced under her roof immediately kicked in, sealing my expression behind a wall of polite, unbroken interest. I did not drop my fork. I did not blink rapidly. I simply looked back at her. "Hartford?" I asked, my voice perfectly level. "I really do not know much about that area at all. I haven't been up there in years." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Phyllis replied smoothly. She picked up her crystal water glass and took a very small, calculated sip. "Just making conversation. It is a busy street, full of offices." She lowered her glass and shifted her eyes toward her son. It was a quick, sharp look, a silent command passing between them. Joel immediately dropped his gaze to his half-eaten pot roast, his jaw tightening visibly. His left thumb began to rub frantically against the base of his pinky finger. They suspected something. The perfect airtight bubble of my secret investigation had just been punctured. I finished my meal, pouring more water for Abby and complimenting the tenderness of the beef. I played my role flawlessly until we finally drove away from the townhouse. The moment we walked through our own front door, I headed straight for the home office. I locked the door behind me, opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, and pulled out the moleskin notebook. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. I forced myself to write out entry number 31. I documented the mention of Pearl Street, the intense eye contact from Phyllis and Joel's physical reaction to the location. The false victory had completely evaporated. We were no longer just gathering evidence in the shadows. The enemy knew I was moving, and Phyllis Lawson was not the type of woman to sit back and wait to be attacked. The clock was no longer just ticking. It was accelerating. The oppressive humidity of a Connecticut June settled over Fairfield County, making the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. The central air conditioning unit hummed constantly outside my home office window, struggling to keep the house cool. Time was no longer just ticking forward. It was accelerating, slipping rapidly through my fingers. Phyllis Lawson had deployed her test at the Sunday dinner table, dropping the name of the street where my attorney worked, and I knew she would not simply wait around to see what I did next. She was a woman who built her entire life on staying 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. My cellular phone vibrated on the desk. It was late Tuesday afternoon. I picked it up and recognized Gail Novak's number. "She is moving faster than we anticipated," the forensic accountant announced the moment I answered. Gail sounded breathless, the sharp clicking of her computer keyboard echoing in the background. I was running a routine weekly sweep on the public property records. Phyllis just refinanced her townhouse down in New Haven. I pressed the phone against my ear, staring blindly at my computer monitor. Why would she refinance her own home? Her mortgage has been paid off for 10 years. She pulled out $120,000 in equity, Gail explained. And she transferred every single penny of it directly into a joint checking account that bears both her name and Joel's name. It is a classic asset shielding tactic. She is creating a massive cash cushion for your husband. I pulled my moleskin notebook from the locked drawer and uncapped my pen. Explain it to me. When the divorce is filed, the court freezes the marital assets, Gail said, her voice dropping into a clinical instructional cadence. Joel will not be able to pull cash from your joint savings without raising alarms. But this new account is funded entirely by a loan taken out against his mother's separate property. If the family court judge asks where he got the money to pay his legal fees or secure a new apartment, Joel will simply say his mother gave him a personal loan to help him survive the divorce. It looks perfectly innocent on paper, but the reality is that Phyllis expects him to pay that money back the moment the dust settles and the marital estate is divided. My pen hovered over the cream-colored paper. What else? Joel just initiated a loan against his retirement account, Gail told me. He withdrew $50,000 from his 401k plan. Taking a loan against your own retirement does not require spousal consent. It is perfectly legal. But that $50,000 immediately reduces the overall value of the marital estate. The sheer scale of their operation hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I wrote the numbers down in a neat vertical column. $285,000 for the stolen condominium. $231,000 stripped away by the fabricated cabin appraisal. $50,000 drained from the retirement account. $47,000 spent on hotel rooms and jewelry for his mistress. I drew a thick black line beneath the column and calculated the total. $613,000. Based on my own careful estimates, our entire marital estate, including the equity in our primary home, the lake cabin, the savings accounts, and Joel's pension hovered right around $1.4 million. Phyllis and Joel had systematically moved hidden or spent nearly half of everything we owned. My mother-in-law was not just helping her son secure a clean break. She was actively orchestrating a financial heist, and she was doing it right in front of my face. A week later, the tension inside the house reached a breaking point. It was mid-June. The air conditioning was failing to keep the upstairs hallway cool. Joel came home much later than usual. He walked into the master bedroom while I was sitting propped up against the pillows reading a paperback novel. I smelled him before he even reached the foot of the bed. It was the sharp metallic scent of construction dust and sweat. There was no trace of the Residence Inn hotel soap, and my bank alerts confirmed no charges had been made that evening. He had actually been at work. He took off his suit jacket and tossed it carelessly over the back of a chair. He did not walk into the bathroom to shower. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room, staring at me. "Meredith," Joel said. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual easy charm. "I ran into Tom Harding today up in Hartford." I turned the page of my book, keeping my eyes fixed on the printed words. Tom Harding was an old fraternity brother of his. "Did you? How is Tom doing?" "Tom is fine," Joel replied. He took a slow step closer to the bed. "He mentioned that he saw you last week. He said he saw you walking into the lobby of a large brick building on Pearl Street." I forced my heart rate to remain steady. I did not look up. I let a few seconds pass, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to appear perfectly unbothered. "Pearl Street," I murmured, acting as if I were struggling to recall the location. "Yes," Joel said, his tone sharpening. "It is a building entirely filled with law firms. Tom recognized you in the lobby." I finally looked up from my book. I met his gaze with absolute unblinking calm. The 16 years of emotional suppression I had learned at his mother's dining table served as an impenetrable shield. "I went up there to meet with a financial advisor," I said smoothly. "Our human resources department at the company offered a complimentary retirement planning consultation, and the firm they contracted with operates out of Hartford. The financial services office is located on the second floor of that building. The law firms are on the fourth and fifth floors." I closed my book and set it on the nightstand. "If you are concerned about our retirement planning, I can certainly call Human Resources tomorrow morning and have them verify the appointment for you." Joel stared at me. He searched my face for any microscopic sign of deception, any nervous twitch, any break in my composure. I gave him absolutely nothing. My expression remained pleasantly neutral, the exact face of a boring, dutiful accountant. His shoulders slowly dropped. He swallowed hard and his left hand reached out to rub the base of his pinky finger. "No," Joel muttered, looking away from me. "No, I am sorry. You do not need to call your office. I was just worried. Worried about what I asked, pushing the knife just a fraction of an inch deeper." "Nothing," he said, quickly turning toward the bathroom. "Forget it. Good night." Listening to the shower turn on, I knew exactly what had just happened. Joel knew I was lying, or at the very least he suspected it heavily. But confronting me meant facing the reality that his entire secret life had been exposed. It meant his mother's grand, flawless plan was falling apart. Joel was a coward. He chose to accept my lie because accepting the lie was infinitely easier than dealing with the truth. But he would tell his mother. He would call Phyllis the next morning and relay the entire conversation, and Phyllis Lawson did not possess a single ounce of cowardice. She would not accept the lie. I slipped out of bed, walked to my office, and unlocked the filing cabinet. I wrote out entry number 34 detailing the confrontation about Pearl Street, my cover story regarding the financial advisor, and Joel's physical withdrawal. The retaliation came swiftly, a coordinated assault that nearly broke me. 3 devastating things happened in the span of a single week in late June. On Monday morning, Gail called me at the office. She had intercepted a new piece of communication. Phyllis had reached out to a second, entirely different real estate appraiser. My mother-in-law was actively building a secondary valuation for the Bantam Lake cabin. She was creating a backup report to submit to the court, one completely untainted by the bribery and the email chain we possessed. If Phyllis swapped out Frank Petrie's fraudulent report for a new legitimate one, our greatest piece of leverage would evaporate into thin air. On Wednesday evening, Joel walked through the front door at 5 o'clock. He carried a bag of groceries. He cooked a complex pasta dinner from scratch, completely ignoring his phone. He sat on the living room floor and played a vintage video game with Abby for 2 straight hours. It was a Thursday. He had canceled his night at the Residence Inn. He stayed home the following Thursday as well, playing the role of the devoted, attentive father with sickening perfection. Someone had warned him to clean up his act. Then came Friday night. I was standing in the upstairs hallway sorting a stack of clean towels when my phone rang. The screen displayed Dana's name. I answered it immediately, stepping into the shadows near the staircase. "Meredith," the attorney said. Her voice was not calm. It carried a sharp, urgent edge that I had never heard from her before. "Bradley Husk just filed an emergency motion with the Superior Court. It is not the divorce petition. He filed a petition for the exclusive use of the marital home." The stack of towels slipped from my hands, tumbling softly onto the hardwood floor. Exclusive use. What does that mean? It means Joel is asking a judge to legally evict you from the house while the divorce is pending, Dana explained. I leaned heavily against the hallway wall. The air in my lungs vanished. "On what grounds my name is on the joint title?" "I pay the mortgage." "He is citing severe marital discord and his spouse's erratic, destructive financial behavior," Dana said, reading directly from the legal filing. "Joel is claiming to the court that you have been secretly siphoning massive amounts of cash from your joint savings accounts without his knowledge or consent. He is pointing directly to the retainer fees you paid to my firm and to Gail Novak. He is framing you as a financial abuser who is actively dissipating marital assets, and he claims he needs you removed from the property to protect his own financial stability." My knees simply gave out. I slid down the painted plaster wall, landing hard on the cold wooden floorboards. I pulled my knees tightly against my chest. Down the hall, a thin strip of light shone from beneath Abby's door, accompanied by the faint, muffled sound of her typing on her computer keyboard. For the very first time in 4 agonizing months, I felt completely overwhelmingly defeated. I had spent half a year preparing for this war. I had built spreadsheets. I had filled a notebook with contemporaneous evidence. I had hired a brilliant attorney and a ruthless accountant. I thought I had controlled every single variable. But I had forgotten the most crucial variable of all. Phyllis Lawson did not just play defense. She counterattacked. Joel was framing me as a thief. The man who had spent $47,000 on another woman's hotel rooms. The man who had casually transferred a $285,000 condominium into his mother's name to hide it from his own wife, was playing the victim. He was going to stand in front of a judge and claim that my attempts to protect myself were acts of financial abuse. I buried my face in my hands. The darkness of the hallway felt suffocating. They were going to take my home. They were going to force me to pack my bags and walk out the front door, leaving my 16-year-old daughter sitting in a house controlled by a man who lied as easily as he breathed. "Meredith," Dana said. Her voice cut through the heavy silence of the phone connection. The urgent edge was gone, replaced by a slow, measured intensity. Listen to me very carefully. Breathe. I took a ragged, shaking breath. This feels like a disaster, Dana continued, her tone dropping lower. This is incredibly stressful short-term news. But you need to understand something right now. Long-term, this emergency petition is the single greatest mistake they could have possibly made. I lifted my head from my knees. How? Because in order to file a petition for the exclusive use of a marital home based on financial grounds, Bradley Husk was legally required to submit Joel's sworn financial affidavit to the court, Dana explained. The sharp predatory confidence had returned to her voice. The affidavit is attached to the filing. I am looking at it right now. In order to prove his financial standing, Joel had to list every single asset he owns. I stared at the glowing strip of light under Abby's door. The pieces began to shift in my mind. If he listed the Bantam Lake cabin on that sworn document at $89,000, relying on Frank Petrie's fraudulent appraisal, Dana said, pausing for dramatic effect, and we currently possess the email chain, proving that he and his mother deliberately orchestrated that false valuation. He just committed perjury, I whispered. The cold dread in my stomach was instantly replaced by a sudden electric shock of clarity. Exactly, Dana confirmed. He just signed a fraudulent document under penalty of perjury and submitted it to a superior court judge. And if Bradley Husk knew about the deal with the appraiser before he filed the paperwork, he just suborned perjury. They tried to go for the throat, Meredith, but they just handed us the rope to hang them both. Does Bradley Husk know? I asked, my voice gaining strength. We are going to find out the moment he reads your forensic accountant's report, Dana said. I ended the call and slowly stood up from the floor. My legs felt weak, but my hands had completely stopped shaking. I gathered the fallen towels, folded them neatly, and placed them into the linen closet. I walked into the master bathroom, turned on the cold water tap, and splashed my face. Staring into the mirror, my eyes were rimmed with red and dark circles bruised the skin beneath them. But the absolute terror was gone. They had launched their greatest weapon, and in doing so, they had stepped directly into the trap we had been building for months. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my desk in the dark, watching the digital clock on my computer monitor slowly tick forward. I pulled out the black notebook and opened it to a fresh page. Entry number 37. I wrote out the details of the emergency motion, the accusations of financial abuse, and the crucial inclusion of the sworn affidavit. I noted the specific time at the bottom of the page. 3:17 in the morning. I signed my name with a heavy, deliberate stroke of the pen. The worst part of the waiting was over. The war had officially begun. The heavy, oppressive heat of early July pressed aggressively against the thick glass windows of the Bridgeport Superior Court. Inside the small courtroom, the air conditioning unit rattled loudly inside the ceiling grate, pumping a steady stream of dry, freezing air into the enclosed space. The room was aggressively ordinary, entirely stripped of any grand legal romanticism. Pale fluorescent lights hummed constantly overhead, casting a harsh, flat white glow over the scuffed wooden tables and the heavily worn blue carpet. A tall American flag stood perfectly still in the right corner, positioned rigidly next to the elevated wooden bench of the presiding judge. I sat at the petitioner table on the left side of the room, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap. The polished wood of the table felt cold against my bare forearms. Dana sat directly beside me. Her posture was relaxed, completely free of tension, but her dark eyes were incredibly sharp. She arranged her manila folders on the table with quiet, deliberate movements, aligning the edges of the paper perfectly. Across the center aisle, Joel sat next to his own attorney. It was the very first time I had ever seen my husband operating inside a formal legal setting. He wore a beautifully tailored charcoal gray suit, the exact suit I had picked up from the dry cleaners for him 2 weeks prior, but he looked deeply uncomfortable wearing it. He kept shifting his weight in the stiff wooden chair. His left thumb rubbed frantically against the base of his pinky finger over and over again, betraying his severe internal panic. Beside him sat Bradley Husk. The opposing counsel was a man in his late 50s, with thick, perfectly styled silver hair. He wore an expensive gray suit and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the fluorescent light every time he moved his head. Husk carried an air of practiced, overwhelming authority. He looked like a man who was entirely used to intimidating women into accepting significantly less than they deserved. The hearing for the exclusive use of our marital home began without any formal ceremony. Husk stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and immediately painted a picture of a household in complete financial chaos. He spoke with a deep, resonating voice, aggressively claiming to the judge that I was draining the family's savings and acting erratically. He requested that I be legally removed from the property immediately to prevent any further damage to the marital estate, framing Joel as a desperate victim trying to protect his hard-earned stability. Dana did not raise her voice when it was her turn to speak. She did not match his theatrical aggression. She simply stood up, adjusted her glasses, and dismantled their entire argument piece by piece. She presented the bank statements to the court clerk, proving definitively that my legal retainer had been paid entirely from a separate premarital inheritance account that Joel had absolutely no legal claim to. Then, without breaking eye contact with the judge, she casually mentioned the $50,000 loan Joel had recently pulled from his own retirement savings account, along with the highly suspicious and poorly timed transfer of the West Hartford condominium directly into his mother's name. The judge was an older woman with deeply tired eyes. She had clearly presided over 1,000 variations of this exact same lie. She did not take long to make a decision. She looked down at Bradley Husk, shook her head slightly, and denied the emergency petition completely. We were both legally ordered to remain in the marital house. It was a victory, but sitting in that freezing courtroom, it felt incredibly small. Walking out through the heavy double doors of the courthouse a few minutes later, I stopped at the top of the wide concrete steps. The July sun was absolutely blinding, beating down on the pavement and radiating heat in thick, wavy lines. I watched Joel walk down the steps a few paces ahead of me. He pulled his cellular phone from his suit pocket and pressed it aggressively to his ear. He did not look shocked by the judge's decision. He did not look like a man whose legal strategy had just failed. He looked absolutely furious. His face was flushed dark red and his jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle jumped rapidly beneath his skin. He was calling Phyllis. Standing there in the overwhelming summer heat, a sudden, heavy realization settled over my shoulders. Joel was not afraid of me. He was not afraid of Dana, and he certainly was not afraid of the judge. My husband was absolutely terrified of his own mother. If he failed to secure the house, if he failed to execute the asset transfer plan perfectly, Phyllis would not let him rest. The actual engine driving this entire divorce process was not his desire to build a new life with Tessa. The true engine was Phyllis Lawson's absolute pathological need to control every single piece of her family's wealth and her absolute refusal to let a woman she deemed unworthy walk away with a single dime. That realization did not bring me any comfort. It only made me feel incredibly isolated. I was not just fighting a cowardly husband who had made a mistake. I was fighting a deeply entrenched two-headed monster, and the smarter head had been plotting my financial ruin from the very beginning. That evening, I drove slowly through my own neighborhood. The summer air rolling through the open windows of my car was thick and humid, carrying the familiar scent of freshly cut grass, warm asphalt, and the distant smell of a charcoal grill. I pulled my car onto the street directly in front of my house, parking tight against the concrete curb instead of pulling into the driveway. I shifted the transmission into park, turned the ignition key backward, and cut the engine. I did not get out of the car. My hands remained, gripping the leather steering wheel locked firmly in the 10 and 2 position, exactly as my mother had taught me when I was 16. The street lamp overhead flickered, casting a pale yellow-orange glow through the glass windshield. The dark shadows of the oak tree leaves danced slowly across the hood of my car. The driver's seat beneath me was still warm from the long commute. Outside, the rhythmic, high-pitched chirping of summer crickets filled the heavy night air. A faint scent of old vanilla air freshener lingered in the enclosed cabin. The radio was completely silent. I sat in the dark and stared at the house. The house I had paid the mortgage on for 16 years. The house where I had painted the nursery walls a soft lavender color when Abby was a little girl. The house that held every single memory of my adult life. The lights in the living room were glowing brightly. Through the front window, I could see the faint shifting blue light of the television screen reflecting against the painted walls. Joel was sitting on the sofa watching a baseball game, as if he had not just attempted to legally throw me out onto the street that very morning. On the second floor, the warm yellow light of Abby's bedroom window spilled out into the dark night. I looked down at my hands resting on the wheel. My fingernails were cut short, clean, and kept completely unpainted. My mother, Corinne, had kept her hands exactly like this. She never wore nail polish. She used to tell me it was entirely unnecessary and a waste of money. Sitting in the dark car, listening to the crickets, I finally understood the truth. She had not avoided polish because it was impractical. She had avoided it because she had completely stopped caring about herself decades ago. 20 years. My mother had endured my father's blatant betrayals for 20 long years. She used to park her blue Ford Taurus in our driveway and sit in the dark for exactly 14 minutes every single night. She used that precious time to count her breaths, to swallow her dignity, and to prepare her facial expression before walking through the front door to pretend she did not know another woman's perfume was lingering on his collar. And here I was, sitting in a parked car outside my own house, hiding in the dark. I had spent the last 4 months constantly telling myself that I was entirely different from Corinne. I told myself my silence was a sophisticated weapon, a necessary strategy to build an impenetrable fortress. I had the complex spreadsheets. I had the black moleskin notebook. I had the brilliant attorney and the ruthless forensic accountant. I had over $600,000 worth of documented, undeniable evidence. But I also had 6 months of cooking warm meals for a man who lied to my face every single day. I had 6 months of sleeping in the exact same bed as the person actively trying to destroy my future. I had 6 months of smiling politely at a mother-in-law who viewed me as nothing more than a disposable obstacle. Was it actually strategic silence? Or was it just another form of passive endurance wrapped in a prettier package? My mother thought she had a valid reason to stay quiet too. She always claimed she stayed silent because her daughter needed a father. I claimed I stayed silent because I needed the financial evidence. Were those reasons truly different? Or were they just the exact same pathetic justification for the exact same suffering? My cellular phone vibrated sharply in the center console cup holder, shattering the heavy silence inside the car. The screen glowed bright white, displaying Dana's name. I picked the phone up and pressed it to my ear. "Hello," Meredith, Dana said. Her voice was completely stripped of any professional pleasantries. It was pure, unfiltered adrenaline vibrating with intense energy. "Joel's attorney just filed the official divorce petition with the court." I stared at the glowing window of my living room. "What does it say?" "It is a standard, no-fault filing," Dana told me, speaking rapidly. "He is citing irreconcilable differences. But that is not the important part." He attached his sworn financial affidavit to the petition. He formally listed the Bantam Lake cabin in the asset column. My grip on the smooth plastic phone tightened. "And the valuation? $89,000, Dana said. The silence in the car felt absolute. The crickets outside seemed to stop chirping. It was the exact number Phyllis had demanded. It was the exact number Frank Petrie had agreed to write on his fabricated appraisal report in exchange for a bottle of expensive liquor. Joel had actually signed his name to the bottom of that document, swearing under oath that the number was legally accurate, and submitted it to the state of Connecticut. "Meredith," Dana asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Are you there?" I looked at the steering wheel. I looked at the dark dashboard. I thought about the 14 minutes my mother used to spend suffocating in her own vehicle, trapped by her own fear. I reached out, pulled the metal door handle, and pushed the heavy car door wide open. I stepped out onto the concrete sidewalk. The July air was incredibly warm and thick with humidity, but as I stood up at my full height, my lungs expanded fully for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The crushing weight that had been sitting on my chest since February instantly vanished. "Dana," I said, looking directly at the solid oak front door of my house. "He filed the petition." "He did," she confirmed. "And he swore under oath that the cabin is only worth $89,000. "Yes, he did." "Then the email chain we have from the appraiser is no longer just evidence of a potential fraud," I said, my voice growing colder and sharper with every single syllable. "It is now documented, undeniable evidence of perjury." Dana paused for 3 full seconds. "You are exactly right. File the counter petition tomorrow morning," I instructed her. I did not ask for her advice. I commanded her. We are not doing a quiet, no-fault divorce. File a fault-based petition. Cite adultery as the primary ground. Include the formal dissipation claim for the $47,000. Include the motion to void the fraudulent condominium conveyance. "And the appraisal fraud?" Dana asked. I could hear the fierce, proud satisfaction radiating in her voice. She had been waiting 4 months for me to finally give this order. "Put it directly into the mandatory discovery package," I said. "I want them to see it." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. I did not sit in the car for 14 minutes. I did not hesitate. The long, tragic legacy of my mother's endurance died right there on the warm concrete sidewalk. I walked purposefully up the driveway, unlocked the front door, and stepped inside. Joel was sitting on the sofa, his eyes glued to the bright television screen. He did not even turn his head as I walked past him. I walked straight up the wooden staircase to the second floor. I quietly opened the door to Abby's bedroom. My daughter was fast asleep on top of her blankets, the soft glow of her open laptop illuminating her face. Her headphones were still resting over her ears, playing faint music. I walked over to the edge of the bed, gently lifted the headphones away from her head, and set them quietly on the nightstand. I closed the laptop, pulled the heavy duvet up over her shoulders, and kissed her forehead. Then I walked down the hall to my home office. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet for the very last time. I pulled out the black notebook and opened it to a fresh page. The black ink flowed smoothly onto the thick cream paper. Entry number 39. Joel officially filed the petition. The cabin was listed at $89,000 in the sworn affidavit. We file the counter petition tomorrow morning. The 6 months are over. I closed the heavy cover of the moleskin notebook. I did not put it back in the dark drawer. I left it sitting squarely in the middle of my desk, right out in the open. The following morning, the sun rose hot and bright over the city of Hartford. Dana filed our counter petition with the Superior Court clerk at exactly 14 minutes past 9 o'clock. It was filed a mere 16 hours after Joel's attorney had submitted their initial paperwork. With one single document, we completely derailed their carefully orchestrated timeline and shattered their illusion of control. The contents of our filing were utterly devastating. We formally requested a fault-based divorce on the grounds of adultery, legally exposing his long-term relationship with Tessa to the permanent public record. We filed a motion demanding a comprehensive forensic audit of all marital assets, effectively freezing his ability to move or hide another single dime. We filed the motion to void the fraudulent transfer of the West Hartford condominium back into his mother's name. We included the itemized dissipation claim for the $47,000 spent on the affair. Finally, we submitted a formal request for temporary spousal support, carefully noting that Joel's current income was significantly higher than mine. We attached Gail Novak's preliminary forensic accounting report to the back of the filing. It was a dense, highly detailed document that laid out the entire financial conspiracy in clinical, irrefutable terms. But Dana did not submit the printed email chain between Phyllis and the real estate appraiser. We intentionally held the smoking gun back from the initial electronic filing. "Are you absolutely sure you want to handle it this way?" Dana had asked me during our strategy call earlier that morning. "I can attach the emails right now. The judge will see them immediately." "No," I replied, staring out my kitchen window at the morning light hitting the backyard grass. "I do not want them to read it on a piece of paper in the privacy of their own homes. I want it delivered directly to their faces." The foundation of my fortress was finally poured in solid concrete. The walls were raised, the heavy iron gates were locked, and the trap was completely set. All I had to do now was wait for my husband and his mother to walk right into the center of the room. 2 weeks after the papers were placed on my kitchen table, the suffocating heat of the Connecticut summer finally broke. A cold gray rain washed over the city of Hartford, slicking the asphalt and beating against the heavy floor-to-ceiling windows of the Prescott and Hale law firm. We sat in a massive conference room on the 4th floor. The space smelled of lemon furniture polish, bitter black coffee, and expensive leather. The air conditioning blew a steady freezing current across the back of my neck. I kept my hands folded neatly on the polished mahogany table, my posture perfectly straight. Across the wide expanse of wood sat Joel and his attorney, Bradley Husk. Joel looked terrible. The confident, arrogant posture he usually carried had completely evaporated over the last 14 days. Since the night I turned my laptop around and showed him the master spreadsheet in our kitchen, he had been living in the guest bedroom of his mother's townhouse. His charcoal suit jacket looked slightly wrinkled around the shoulders. Dark, heavy shadows bruised the skin beneath his eyes. His left thumb rubbed frantically against the bare base of his pinky finger, over and over again, an endless loop of nervous energy. Bradley Husk, however, looked entirely unbothered. The older attorney opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and arranged them neatly in front of him. His silver pen tapped lightly against the wood. He still believed he was holding the winning hand. He still believed he was dealing with a naive accountant who could be bullied into a quiet, unequal settlement. "Let us get straight to the point," Miss Prescott Husk began, directing his deep, resonant voice entirely at Dana. He did not even look at me. "My client is prepared to be incredibly generous today, to avoid a protracted, ugly litigation process. We are willing to concede the primary residence in Fairfield to your client, free and clear." Dana sat back in her heavy chair. She did not touch the single manila folder resting on the table in front of her. And in exchange for this generosity, Husk continued steepling his fingers, "Your client will forfeit any and all claims to Mr. Lawson's retirement accounts, the West Hartford condominium, and the family cabin up on Bantam Lake. As we outlined in the sworn financial affidavit submitted to the court, the cabin is currently valued at $89,000. It requires significant structural repair. We feel this is a more than equitable division of the overall marital estate. The room fell completely silent, save for the low hum of the ventilation system and the steady drumming of the rain against the glass. I looked at Joel. He kept his eyes glued to the surface of the mahogany table, refusing to meet my gaze. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was sitting in a formal legal proceeding, allowing his attorney to present a fraudulent number that he had sworn under oath was true. The sheer cowardice of the man I had married for 16 years was breathtaking. $89,000, Dana repeated. Her voice was flat, carrying no inflection whatsoever. You are standing firmly behind that specific valuation for the Bantam Lake property. We are Husk confirmed, offering a tight, condescending smile. The appraisal is certified. Dana finally leaned forward. She opened the manila folder. She did not pull out a massive stack of papers. She pulled out a single thin packet of printer paper stapled neatly in the top left corner. She slid the packet across the smooth mahogany surface. It came to a stop directly in front of Bradley Husk. I strongly suggest you read that email chain before we continue this conversation, Dana said. Husk picked up the papers. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began to read. I watched the older attorney with absolute focus. The transformation was not slow. It happened in a matter of seconds. His eyes tracked across the first page, moving rapidly. Then they stopped completely. His silver pen slipped from his fingers and clattered loudly against the wooden table. The condescending smile vanished. All the color rapidly drained from his face, leaving his skin looking like pale ash under the harsh fluorescent lights. He flipped to the second page. He read the exact words Phyllis Lawson had typed, demanding the appraiser alter the value from $320,000 down to $89,000. He read Frank Petrie's reluctant agreement to commit real estate fraud. Husk was a seasoned legal professional. He knew exactly what he was holding. He was holding proof that his client had committed felony perjury on a sworn court document. He was holding proof that he, as the attorney of record, had unknowingly submitted a fraudulent document to a superior court judge. Husk slowly lowered the papers. He turned his head and looked at Joel. The look was not one of support or defense. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fury. Did you know about this? Husk asked. His voice was a harsh, breathless whisper. Joel flinched. He looked at the papers, then looked at his attorney. Know about what my mother handled the appraisal. I just signed the affidavit. You signed a sworn legal document under penalty of perjury, Husk hissed, entirely abandoning his professional decorum. Your mother bribed a licensed appraiser to hide over $200,000 in equity, and you submitted that fabricated number to the state of Connecticut. Joel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked desperately across the table at me, panic finally breaking through his carefully maintained facade. He was waiting for me to say something, to offer some kind of lifeline, just as I had always done whenever he found himself in trouble during our marriage. I did not offer him a lifeline. I offered him an anchor. And while we are discussing full financial disclosures, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room like a blade. Joel snapped his attention to me. His chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The telecommunications charges for the secondary iPhone SE. I continued, keeping my tone perfectly measured and polite. The phone you keep hidden beneath the stack of navy blue polo shirts in the third drawer of your closet. I noticed those charges were completely absent from your financial affidavit as well. I assume Tessa has been calling that number for the last 2 years. Joel physically recoiled. His shoulders collapsed inward, and his back hit the leather chair with a dull thud. His mouth hung slightly open. The mention of the hidden phone was the kill shot. It was the final, undeniable proof that there was absolutely no corner of his secret life that I had not thoroughly catalogued. He realized in that exact moment that I had been hunting him in the dark for 6 months, and he had never even heard my footsteps. Bradley Husk stood up abruptly. The legs of his heavy chair scraped violently against the carpet. Miss Prescott Husk said, his voice rigid with barely contained anger. He rapidly shoved his documents back into his leather briefcase. We require an immediate recess. Actually, strike that. Please note for the record that I am formally suspending this settlement conference. Dana nodded slowly. Understood, counselor. Furthermore, Husk continued, snapping the brass locks of his briefcase shut. I will be filing a motion with the court this afternoon to formally withdraw as Mr. Lawson's legal representation, citing a severe and irreconcilable conflict of interest. He did not look at Joel again. He turned on his heel and walked straight out of the conference room, the heavy glass door swinging shut behind him. Joel sat entirely alone on his side of the massive table. He looked small. He looked completely ruined. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down upon him. Without an attorney facing massive financial clawbacks, and staring down the very real threat of criminal perjury charges, he had absolutely no leverage left. The fortress his mother had built for him was nothing but dust. Dana closed her folder. "I think we are done here for today." We stood up and walked out of the conference room. I did not look back at the man sitting alone in the cold air conditioning. The reception area of the law firm was quiet. The thick carpet absorbed the sound of our footsteps. Sitting in one of the high-backed leather waiting chairs was Phyllis Lawson. She wore a tailored navy blue suit and a string of authentic pearls around her neck. The heavy, familiar scent of Joy by Dior drifted through the lobby air. She had a glossy magazine resting on her lap, but she was not reading it. She sat with perfect, rigid posture, waiting for her son to emerge victorious from the conference room. She fully expected to see me walk out in tears, completely defeated by her superior strategy. Phyllis looked up as I approached. Her polite, condescending smile was already forming on her lips. Then, the heavy glass doors of the inner hallway opened again. Joel walked out into the lobby. Phyllis saw his face, and the practiced smile instantly vanished from her mouth. She stood up, the magazine sliding off her lap and hitting the floor with a loud slap. She looked at her son's pale, bloodless face, his slumped shoulders, and the absolute absence of his attorney. Her sharp eyes darted between Joel and me, her brilliant mind rapidly trying to calculate exactly what catastrophic failure had just occurred inside that room. "Joel," Phyllis asked, her voice tight with sudden alarm. "Where is Bradley? What happened in there?" Joel could not look at his mother. He stared firmly at the floor pattern, completely unable to speak the words. I stopped walking. I stood directly in front of the woman who had spent 16 years treating me like a disposable piece of furniture. I looked at her expensive pearls, her perfectly styled hair, and the sudden raw panic bleeding into her eyes. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults at her in the middle of the quiet lobby. I simply offered her the exact same mild, accommodating smile I had given her for almost 2 decades. "You really should have closed the kitchen window, Phyllis," I said gently. I did not wait to watch the realization hit her. I turned and walked toward the elevator banks, leaving the two of them standing together in the wreckage of their own making. By late October, the legal dust had finally settled. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the appraisal fraud and the terrifying prospect of the judge referring the matter to the state prosecutor for perjury, Joel had folded completely. He hired a new, significantly cheaper attorney, and they accepted every single demand Dana placed on the table. The West Hartford condominium was clawed back into the marital estate. The $47,000 he spent on his affair was credited directly to my side of the ledger. He surrendered his entire claim to the primary residence in Fairfield to offset the stolen funds. He walked away with half the value of his own retirement account and the crumbling cabin on Bantam Lake. He moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. I never asked if Tessa moved in with him. I truly did not care. It was a Friday evening. The sun was setting early, casting a deep golden-orange light across the bare branches of the oak tree in my front yard. The air outside was crisp, carrying the sharp, clean scent of dried fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. I stood in the center of my kitchen. The house belonged entirely to me now. The deed was registered solely in my name, locked safely away in the bottom drawer of the metal filing cabinet in my office. The black moleskin notebook had been completely burned in the backyard fire pit the previous weekend. Upstairs, the faint, steady rhythm of Abby's music drifted down through the ceiling. She was safe. She was completely insulated from the financial disaster her father had tried to drag us into. She simply knew her parents were divorcing, and her life would carry on with minimal disruption. I walked over to the kitchen sink. I reached out and grabbed the metal crank of the window overlooking the backyard. I turned the handle, pushing the glass pane outward until it was opened as far as the hinges would allow. The cool autumn air rushed into the warm kitchen, washing away the stagnant scent of the house. I leaned my hands against the granite counter and looked out at the darkening sky. The house was incredibly quiet. For the first time in my life, I truly understood the profound difference between two identical things. The silence my mother had endured in her parked car had been heavy, suffocating, and built entirely out of fear. The silence I had carried for 6 months had been cold, calculated, and built entirely out of necessity. But the silence filling my kitchen right now was entirely different. It carried no weight at all. It was not a weapon, and it was not a shield. It was just the quiet, ordinary sound of a woman who had finally fought her way out of the dark, standing in a house she owned, breathing the clean air of a life that finally belonged only to her. When you stand at the altar and promise to share your life with someone, you rarely think about the paperwork. You do not think about bank statements, property deeds, or the hidden passwords that guard your joint future. It is incredibly easy to let the person you love handle the complicated details. You focus on raising the children, maintaining the home, and keeping the family together, while you blindly trust that the financial foundation beneath your feet is solid. But blind trust is not a virtue when it comes to your own security. It is a massive vulnerability. The story you just heard is not merely about a painful betrayal. It is a very real warning about the weaponization of financial ignorance. If you ever find yourself standing in the wreckage of a broken marriage, your raw emotions will scream at you to confront the people who hurt you. You will want to demand answers right then and there. You will want to look them in the eye and show them exactly how much pain they have caused. Do not do it. Do not let your immediate anger cost you your long-term survival. There is a profound difference between the silence of a victim and the silence of a strategist. The silence of a victim is built on fear and the desperate hope that things will somehow get better if you just endure a little longer. That kind of silence will slowly destroy you from the inside out, but strategic silence is an entirely different mechanism. It is the sheer discipline to keep your mouth completely shut while you open your eyes and finally look at the cold, hard numbers. You need to know exactly what your life costs. You need to know the login credentials to the joint checking accounts, the balances of the retirement funds, and the true market value of the roof over your head. You cannot protect what you do not understand. If you suspect that the person sleeping next to you is plotting a quiet exit, the absolute worst thing you can do is give them a warning. The moment you confront a liar without carrying undeniable proof, you simply teach them how to hide their lies better. You give them the opportunity to move the money, rewrite the narrative, and leave you standing in the cold with absolutely nothing. Instead, you must become a quiet student of your own life. Gather the documents, print the statements, seek out professional legal and financial advice before you ever show your hand. Build your fortress in the dark, and only step into the light when your walls are completely impenetrable. Have you ever found yourself nodding along to a financial decision simply to keep the peace in your home? Have you ever discovered a hidden truth about someone you loved but forced yourself to stay quiet until you knew exactly how to handle it? How did you find the strength to navigate that terrifying waiting period? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be the exact warning another woman needs to hear tonight.